All right, so now we're going to turn back to Britain a few hundred years, well, quite a few hundred years after Beowulf, and to Chaucer, uh, who is seen as like the godfather of English literature due to the fact that he wrote what ostensibly could be called the first major work in the English vernacular, in actual English instead of Latin, which is what most literature would have been written in up until this time. All right, so Chaucer's born, we believe, somewhere between 1340 and 1344. He's born to a successful businessman, a vintner or wine salesman, who makes sure Chaucer is well educated and ensures he is exposed to various cultures in England at that time, which he would have been because his father would have been trading with people coming from the continent, coming from France, coming from Italy, coming from Spain, that type of thing. And he made sure that he was exposed to those who held power. So at a young age, I think 14 or 15, he becomes a page of the Countess of Ulster, who is related to the royal family. And this allows him to see another side of the society in which he lives, and that's the side of the ruling class. Now, this also allows him to develop the skills that allow him to have a career serving the ruling class, and this is how he'll make his living in administration and bureaucracy for the kings. And he becomes adept at keeping himself on the correct side of various political struggles. At this time and for the next few hundred years, especially in England, there's all sorts of political struggles between different families who believe that they have the right to the throne. And Chaucer is politically savvy and understands how to stay on the winning side of those struggles. And so, unlike Dante, who is not on the winning side when the Black Guelphs take over Florence, Chaucer stays in good stead with each of the rulers. Now, he does serve in the Hundred Years' War, which is one of these struggles, and he fights in France and is captured in France, and he gets released due to paying a fairly heavy fine. Now, he does also travel repeatedly to France, Spain, and Italy, which is very important. Now, he marries well, and his wife's sister is married to John of Gaunt, who's the Duke of Lancaster again, giving him ties to the royal family. He joins King Edward III's royal household and becomes an esquire, but he doesn't make it into the prestigious role of knight, which would have allowed him into the inner circle. He spends a lot of time on the European continent, where he becomes familiar with the works of Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio. This is very important because this will have a huge influence on his own work. In 1374, he takes over what becomes a major career move for him and a major part of his bureaucratic career in keeping the custom records. He's the controller of customs in London. And this puts him in even further contact with foreigners who are bringing their goods in and out of London. Now, through the various changes in kings, and then with Richard II, he rises in the bureaucratic ranks and serves Richard II until his death in 1400. He does leave London at some point. He moves to Kent, but still holds a bureaucratic job since he never makes a living from his writing. So this needs to be aware that while he's seen as the godfather of English literature, he doesn't make a living from it as writers can today, unless he had a patronage. And unfortunately, his patronage are somewhat insignificant. Now, as we spoke about, as with the caste system in India, England has a rigid and strict hierarchy in the feudal system. Now, this hierarchy is set up with three rankings. We have the religious at the top, so that's the Pope, and you know who's in Rome, and then all the other members of the Catholic Church, ranging from the bishops all the way down to the lesser prelates, including the priests. Below them, we then have the emperors and kings and the rest of the nobility. And so you have to be aware now that the Pope actually has more power than the King of England at this time. This is what will prove to be a problem for for Henry VIII when he wants to get divorced. But we're not going there. It's in the next course if you take the second half of this. And then finally, after the nobility and the emperors and kings, we have what makes up the majority of the people of England, who are the free persons and what are known as bond persons. They're like 98% of the population. So it's a little like the United States in that we've got 1% of the rich owning almost everything, and then the rest of us having a little bit of something else. Now, it should be realized that this hierarchy at this time was viewed by most as arising naturally, and that each group, and so it's organic, and each group is seen as being connected to the other two and contributing in its own way to the success of the society. So a very simplistic way to look at this is the Pope and his people are taking care of the souls of society, supposedly. The king and his nobility are taking care of the defense of the society, because if there's armies that need to be raised, the nobility will raise them. And the free persons providing the food and materials needed for the materiality of society, for the actual physical being of the society. And there is a sense that God chooses the kings. That this is the way that this hierarchy is set up is the way that God wants it set up, and so it's just a natural structure, which will come to be questioned only 100 years from this when we get into humanism. Now, because the organic interdependence, the delineation was blurrier than what I just described. It isn't so clear cut. So there's new categories of people that would spring up that did not quite fit exactly into any one of the three major groups. So you have issues like knights, who are supposedly part of the nobility, but they don't have land, so they can't really be part of the nobility. And you have people who had earned their status via administrative positions, and so they're considered middle class, even though they could serve in Parliament. And Chaucer belonged to this group, and this is something that comes up with, I think he's looking at when we look at the Canterbury Tales. Now, as far as his work, there's a very heavy French influence on Chaucer, as you have to understand that the French conquered England in 1066 with the Norman invasion, and they're still in power. And so there's not this delineation, this separateness of France and England that we see now. At this time, the French and the English, they consider themselves cousins, etc., the kings and all. There's a lot more intermingling. In fact, French was a language of the nobility and of the administration of England for almost 300 years after the Norman invasion. The common person speaking English, but it's not being spoken by those who are in the courts, or those who are writing the rules and the laws. All right. Now, at this time, France and England are not seen as separate. They share values and aesthetics, and will draw on these. He has to. It's within the world that he's living. It's his zeitgeist. The other major influence on Chaucer's work, and this probably more so than the fact that he's living in somewhat a French-speaking society, is the Italian. And like I said, he's traveled back and forth. He's aware of Dante and other major Italian poets, and this influenced him, especially as far as the form of his poem. He follows Boccaccio, who is highly regarded for his dialogue, and Chaucer's own royal rhyme. So a rhyme is the rhyme scheme of what's going to rhyme with what. So in his, it's A, B, A, B, B, C, C. So the A's rhyme with each other, the B's rhyme with each other, and the C's. And now this royal rhyme is what they're calling it, evolves from Boccaccio's ottava rima, or 8 rhyme. And that's an A, B, A, B, A, B, C, C. He just kind of transforms that some. Now, the great importance of Chaucer's poetry is that even though English is seen as a blunt instrument in comparison to Italian or French, and you can listen to English, English does not flow as beautifully as Italian or French does, just the sounds. You have to take that into account. And so it's somewhat of a blunt instrument to write poetry, and it's really considered that at this time. But Chaucer decides he doesn't care. He's going to use the blunt instrument, and he writes his works in the vernacular, in the everyday English of the people of England. And this is why he's considered the godfather of English literature. All right, and that is a major contribution of his. All right, hopefully this will give you a little background, allowing you to tackle the Canterbury Tales. I realize you may not like them that much, but please, at least be appreciative of the fact you're not being made to read them in the Old English, which your book gives you a short example of at the beginning. They've at least translated into more modern English for you. You'd have a much harder time with it. All right, so have fun.